So, over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much. Firstly, thanks for everybody for coming. Could have been an empty room, but no, it's very good to see you all. This is very much an update. I'm going to sit down for a lot of the first part of this because it's historical stuff, and then I'll bounce around when I'm really just talking to the screen in a few slides' time. So yeah, this is just about basically an update after about 18 months, maybe 2 years of work on the Abbey that I've been doing. A mixture of historical and archaeological investigation. I'm just drawing it all together. Now, as I say here, that whilst I'm certainly not the first to write or investigate the Abbey, I'm taking a broader framework to gain a wide picture of the as possible. The majority of the available literature tends to focus on the monastic period, which comes from either the chronicles of Melrose or the writings of Abbot Robert Reid's biographer Ferrius, and that's back in the sort of 1530s. Once you get past 1560, there's not a huge amount generally out there, although when you start looking into it and digging into primary source, etc., it all comes out. What archaeological investigations have occurred to date have really been focused, commercial, research-based, and these have looked at individual features and sites rather than the entire monastic complex. And there are no plans of the monastic complex or indications of its scale. Firstly then, where is Kinloss and where is Kinloss Abbey? Obviously Moray Firth sitting there. This is Findorn Bay here, Kinloss Airfield, and then sitting there is the Abbey within this area here. And a couple of things to really leap out with straight away is this sort of semi-oval shape of the Abbey and the home farm, which we believe is the site of the original estate. Interestingly, the main road, the B9011, respects the perimeter all the way around on that side, rather than taking the shortcut over there. The Kinloss burn has been straightened. This is an improvement period, straightening, canalised. We've got the road that goes up to Findorn on there, and then continuing off to Birkhead, and then the road that swings around and back up to the 96 here. The railway track here, that's relatively modern, 1858 that came through. So that's where we are at the moment. And interestingly, the actual area of this home farm is around about 110 to 115 acres, which is quite interesting because they always work out that a monk required some 5 acres of land to sustain them for a year. So that works out at about 20 to 22 monks, which is generally the largest that this monastery ever held. So that sort of ties in. Going out a bit further from here, all of this ended up as monastic lands, and up on this corner up here we've got a place called Windy Hills, which is an associated nunnery, which is my next phase of finding that one there out. Okay, just a quick look at the overall side of the project then. Produce a clear understanding of the history, scale and importance of Kinloss Abbey in the immediate and wider landscape. So quite a small little heading there, basically as much as I can find. To integrate historical, archaeological and metal detecting data. And as far as the archaeological research is going, I'm using field walking, surveying the upstanding remains, non-invasive survey of the subsurface remains outside of the graveyard. Inside the graveyard it's a scheduled monument, I'm not allowed to get in there. But outside I've got a very friendly farmer who's very interested, so that's been a real bonus. And who knows in the future, maybe he'll let us have a little dig, but we'll wait and see on that, we shan't do our chickens. As far as historical research is concerned, I've been using primary and secondary material as it comes up. Just a very, very quick background then. Early on, Moray itself was in almost constant rebellion with the rulers of the rest of Scotland and their leaders were generally referred to as either kings of Moray or earls of. Now, David I was crowned, as you can see, at 1124, but held little direct control over Moray at that time. Angus, who was either the king of Moray or the earl of Moray at the time, sided with a bunch of rebels that marched south against David in 1130. It didn't go well, so he was killed. And then after that, David I started the pacification of Moray through castles, boroughs and monasteries. Part of this, 1150, David I invited the Cistercian monks from Melrose to establish a monastery at Kinloss, and they came down through there. Now, the area of Kinloss is suited to the Cistercian model, can't give me words out, on slightly elevated ground with a watercourse running on two sides, pretty much standard for them. Set in a rural environment, the Cistercians officially preferred inhospitable place. A place of horror and dread solitude was the general one they wanted to go for. However, I think this is probably a little bit dubious, certainly in the lack of Moray, because that was like prime farming land at the time. So I think they just got the land. And in fact, it's likely that the estate on which Kinloss Abbey was set was taken by David I from the supporters of Angus and given to his own supporters and or the Cistercians. And indeed, there is a theory that Kinloss was possibly the site of a Pictish monastery preceding it. We shall see. Very quick thing about the Cistercians themselves then. The Benedictine order, or the Black Monks, was first formed in Italy in 529 AD, and by the 9th century the Benedictine monasteries were the standard model of monastic life throughout Europe. However, by the 11th century many monks were dissatisfied with this. Think Friar Tuck. Things had got slack, such that in 1098 3 monks, led by Saint Robert of Moseley, formed a new monastery at Cîteaux in France, central France, wishing to revert to the more pure and austere religious observation of St. Benedict's, the rule of St. Benedict's. These monks, known as Cistercians, wore white habits. A lot of differences, a couple of high points. They lived purely by the rules, certainly initially, of St. Benedict. Their abbeys were to have minimum decoration, very plain. No children. By that they meant minimum age for recruitment was 16 years of age to enter monasteries. And they created the lay brothers to do the manual work around the monastery, as they focused a lot more on services. They did up to 8 services a day, starting at 2 o'clock in the morning and finishing at 8 o'clock at night. And when they weren't doing that, they were either eating or doing manuscripts and various other bits and bobs. It did, however, prove very popular, and by around 1212 AD, there were over 700 Cistercian abbeys across Europe, with some 20,000 monks. It was based on a disciplined order, the mother or founding houses inspecting daughter houses annually. And every year there was a general meeting of the prelates, usually, or initially this was held at Cîteaux, where the uniformity of rules and customs was reinforced. And this contact between monasteries meant a transfer of knowledge, rules as I've just said, and also such things as herbal medicines and architectural styles were all discussed there. Coming into Britain and to Kinloss, in 1131 we saw the foundation of Rievaulx in Yorkshire. One of Rievaulx's daughter monasteries was Melrose, which was founded in 1136, and in turn Melrose founded Kinloss in 1150. Right. Throughout the 400 years of monastic existence, the abbey underwent periods of neglect, renovation, renewal, additions under its various habits. The abbey, as I said, was founded in 1150, consecrated in 1151, and its first abbot, under its first abbot, the second abbot, Renius, received the papal bull from Pope Alexander III in 1174. Kinloss swiftly gained a high status, to the extent that the annual meeting of the prelates was actually held at Kinloss in 1214, which was, you know, quite a high-powered thing to do. Initially, and such was its size, because you needed at least an extra 12, 13 monks to be able to go and form other monasteries. Kinloss had two daughter monasteries. The first one at Curas, which I'm told is the right pronunciation, in 1217, and a couple of years later, Deer Abbey over at Aberdeen were the two daughter abbeys for Kinloss. Initially, it was constructed in wood, as a lot of them were, first off, until 1269, when a fire struck the abbey. This required a substantial rebuilding of stone, believed to come from Greenbrae Quarry near Burghead, about 5 miles away. And we can see things like the composite columns that's still there, which is an indication of the extra work that went into it and as it was redone. In 1296 and again in 1303, Edward I came for a visit. He was up campaigning, and a couple of years later, 1136, Edward III again, when he was up relieving a siege at Lochendorb. This was quite a normal thing. Both the Edwards were big patrons of the Cistercian abbeys down south. So think of it more as a multinational company these days. And they were also sort of above politics, so to speak. So although they went in and they stayed there, they didn't smash up the monastery, certainly here. And when they left, the locals didn't go, oh, you're siding with the Edwards. It all went very well. So that was the sketch on that one there. Although that said, with his visits, they nearly bankrupted the abbey, just eating him out of house and home. So that was not a good thing. And then in 1371, Adam of Taras became the abbot. A couple of interesting things happened during his time. Firstly, is that me? That's okay. Firstly, rumours started to spread about Adam. They got as far as Rome, Situ, and even as far as Elgin. That's how bad it was. He had a lurid lifestyle. In other words, he was married. He had a missus. Okay, not an official one, but he had a wife, common law wife, and they had children. He built the first abbot's house, and in 1396, the abbey was actually mitred, so it had a seat in Parliament, which was, you know, quite a big step up for the abbey itself. Other minor little things, I say minor things, 1390 we had the Wolf of Badenoch that swept down and burned bits of Inverness and Forres and various other bits and bobs and Elgin. Didn't touch Kinloss Abbey, interestingly. Although he did, I believe, take out a bit of Plascarton Abbey, but certainly got rid of the cathedral, or attacked the cathedral in Elgin. I often wonder whether that's anything to do with his common law wife, whether she was involved, sort of somewhere along the lines on that. I don't know. I'll just throw that one out there, a little hand grenade. What else has happened? Excuse me. In 1440, the abbey had become very rich on farming and various other activities, commercial activities. So Abbot Ellen in 1440 decided it was time to have a nice big bell tower over the crossing with a spire on the top of it. So we started to build it. That was completed by 1470 under Abbot Guthrie. And again, it almost bankrupted the abbey to the extent they had to sell some of their treasures. I always like the fact that they sold some of them rather than them all. So things from being very austere had turned around somewhat in sort of 200 odd years. Murder most foul, 1490. One of the monks, a chap called William Butler, murdered a young boy in the cloisters. We know nothing other than that, what the boy was doing there or anything. But he was arrested but sent to Rome, where he was actually acquitted by the Pope. He was under escort, but interestingly, both him and his escort disappeared on the way back from Rome. So we know not what happened to them. And then there was a robbery in 1515. And at this time, John Gordon, who was the eldest son of the Earl of Huntly, so not a, under me sort of thing, quite a big guy, went in there and stole a load of monies and valuables and everything else from the abbey belonging to one of the ladies in the area that used it sort of as a repository, not suppository. Edit that bit. Now I've got that right. Anyway, he hot-footed it off to France, came back a couple of years later, begging for forgiveness, and stayed in the monastery then for the rest of his life till he died, and apparently was buried within the abbey grounds. And then 1528, there's a large flood in the area which actually swamped into the abbot's house, and also actually spread into the cloister area. And for those of you that were down there, you can see just how high that water level was to have got in there. And slide a little bit further on, that you can you get a good understanding of that. Just after that, same sort of year, Abbot Robert Reid came in. Now, Robert Reid, you could do a talk on him on his own. He was elected to succeed by the previous one, Abbot Crystal, because by this time it was more of a secular appointment to become an abbot rather than the religious stuff. However, from the writings of Ferrius, a scholar that came over and was his biographer, he was a very pious man and did that. Now, Reid is certainly the highest profile abbot of Kinloss. I will caveat that by saying he's the only guy that anything was written on. And he was a multi-talented individual, a lawyer by training. He improved the abbot's house, basically rebuilt it, established a large library, continued to renovate the abbey, including employing an artist to paint frescoes in 3 of the 7 chapels, the chapter house and the chambers. He was also made Bishop of Orkney. He was noted as a great and gifted diplomat, arranging peace with England, including several diplomatic missions to Henry VIII to arrange the borders, so he must have been pretty good to get that past Henry. When he died, he left 8,000 marks for the foundation of the University of Edinburgh, created a forward-looking policy of educational reforms at Kinloss, and is credited with some of the foundations of the Scottish education system. Now, Reid had his finger on the pulse, as you can imagine, being a smart dude, regarding the future direction of the Church of Scotland. And in 1515, he elected his nephew, Walter, to succeed him as abbot. Now, no abbots could have legitimate children. However, monastic property could be feud to one's kin, and the best way was to resign in favour of a nephew, which is what Robert Reid did. And this happened in at least 15 other Scottish monasteries before 1560, where control was passed before the Reformation of Parliament. So the abbacy, and therefore the income, probably more important, for the estate, could remain in the same family. And then got the Reformation. Now for the post-monastic period. I've had to build up quite a lot of this stuff. It's not quite so well written or recorded at the moment. As you know, Walter Reid was the last abbot of Kinloss, and in 1560 he renounced Catholicism for Protestantism, signed the first Reformation convent, resulting which was to secure the lands of the abbey for his own use. Despite his vow of celibacy, he married Mary Collis, lived in the abbot's house, and had several children. At this point, the physical demise of Kinloss Abbey began. The steeple collapsed in 1574, taking with it part of the roof. Now, this was about 100 years old at this time, and questioned how well it had been maintained, both pre and post the Reformation. Reid began to sell off the abbey lands to maintain his lifestyle, and he died in 1589, leaving the property to his wife. She maintained that until 1603, when she sold the abbey to Sir Edward Bruce, of Robert the Bruce lineage actually. Came from sort of further down south, more in the central belt, but became the Lord of Kinloss, and with it, of course, a seat in Parliament, so that may well have had something to do with it. Edward Bruce was heavily involved in the succession of James VI to become James I of England. In fact, they had a society of guys that were actually running around doing the stuff and all the background work, something like 40 odd quite high-powered individuals, of which Edward Bruce was number 8. So he was quite well up the tree, actually. Bruce died in 1611, and his son, again Edward, succeeded him. However, a few years later, following a dispute, he went to the Netherlands to fight a duel. It didn't go well. And his second son, Thomas, inherited. In 1643, Thomas, basically, going back a stage, both Edward and Thomas all inherited a lot of properties down south, plus their original properties around the central belt area. So exactly how much time they spent at Kinloss, I don't know, but they had a seat in the Parliament there. So 1643, Thomas Bruce sold the already crumbling ruins to Alexander Brodie of Leven, who in 1650 sowed stone for the monastery to Cromwell's men to build the citadel of Inverness. And that's a famous old picture, this one here, but that's where the citadel was. It was only actually occupied for some 11 years. The local population had used the chapter house as their place of worship, where it raged at the loss because basically they were carting off all stone from the abbey. So Brodie built them a new church and manse in its place. Right. Leaping forward a bit, and still under the period of the Brodies, they actually had Kinloss Abbey for something like 160 years. And in 1746, during the Brodie ownership, the then Laird, Alexander Brodie V, commissioned William Anderson, a local surveyor, to survey all Leven lands, including Kinloss, which was a very early example of improvements in Morayshire. We'll see a little bit more of that later. Brodie family held it until 1802, when Anne Brodie sold the abbey to a local farmer, William Forbes. Now, the fabric of the Kinloss had become a standing quarry by this time. Its stone was used in farms and public buildings across the local area. In fact, to speed up the extraction, around about 1840, Forbes blew up the west gable of the abbot's house, just so they could access stone even quicker. I'll carry on with this post-monastic period, but a little bit more interesting stuff. The local population were quite enraged by this, and especially with the blowing up bit. You know, letters were written to the government to try and get things done, and letters, as you can see, to the Forest Gazette, and it doesn't get much heavier than that. So, in August over here, 1844, we can see the flowery temple to their admiration and succeeding ages regret that, although we call public attention to the subject, the work of destruction is proceeding apace. So there's a lot of people really trying to stop the destruction of the abbey at this time. This was echoed in April 43, again, earnestly trusted to have the desired effect when they tried to send information or requests to the commissioners of woods and forests to actually stop the wanton destruction. And in November of there, again, another letter here. 8 months ago, a petition was sent to the place, the barons of Her Majesty's Exchequer, praying for them to take the ruins of the Abbey of Kinloss under their protection. But it was interesting, when you get a bit further down here, no part of the structure was accepted upon which the Crown could find a right to interfere. Consequently, the fate of the unfortunate abbey was sealed. So they went through the local bit, but at the time they said, no, sorry, it's in the charter. It's going to go down. Help was at hand a couple of years later when the Dunbar family bought the abbey off of Forbes before it was completely and utterly trashed. This is Captain Edward Dunbar. He married Phoebe Dunbar. One would hope not a sister or first cousin, but he did that and they became the Dunbars. They started a programme at this stage of restorations and certainly pretty much stopped the destruction of the abbey at this time. So a lot of things went down. Keen antiquarian. His son, the Reverend John Dunbar, was again a very keen antiquarian, and he did a lot of work in there, a lot of excavations. One of the excavations he did was, obviously, he was the Reverend, so he could do it. He used the blueprints of normal other Cistercian abbeys and went in between the graves, digging little slot trenches, little evaluation trenches all over the place to prove out that that was the actual footprint of the abbey as stood. He also found, when he was going into one of the chapels, that there's a large number of stones, masonry, there's other stuff here, I should have it here, a burial ground, oak coffins, there was tiles, there were bits of bodies and various other bits he found. One of the things that happened though, most of his finds, not the human bits, but certainly tiles, etc., he held in his own private museum, which everybody said, well, they can go and see it any time, but where that stuff is now, I have no idea. I'm still trying to locate that. John Dunbar, the Reverend, died in 1905, and his wife carried on his work, and she restored what we now call the sacristy, and turned it into a chapel. And I've got a nice picture right at the very end of it, looking down through that. And there's quite a romantic little story here. I mean, the floor had been cemented, that's not particularly romantic. A stone altar had been placed at the east end, having ingeniously formed out the carved remnants lying around. So a lot of stone lying around. The front of which may perhaps, although not certainly, have been the tomb of John Gordon, who broke into the church for robbery in 1515. So there's a bit of a romantic story on that one there. They think that might be the actual frontage of his tomb. But the actual formation of the chapel and its inauguration was in 1911. The actual plan up here, it's dated 1906. I have no idea of the provenance of that, or rather, let's put that another way. There's 1906 written on it. Let's put it that way. I have a sneaky feeling this could be at least a copy of Reverend John's Dunbar's plan. Can't hold me to it, I don't know for certain, but there's just that possibility. There is stuff here which is now not showing, so this has obviously been done some time ago. But that's it. The Dunbars continued to around about 1934, when it then started to pass finally into government hands, and the Ministry of Works started looking at it. They did a survey in 1920 as well. And this photograph here, taken obviously, you can see 1928, I don't know why I've got these notes, is the Abbot's house as it was at that time. We're looking west to east, so the west gable that was blown up obviously is long gone by this stage. But some interesting little points. There is the stair tower. There's obviously the east gable, bottom floor here, or the cellar really. First living room here with the big fireplace that's been filled in, north stack. My interpretation of this wall here, that's the actual wall of the building, same deal here. My interpretation of that is it's a wall put in for a lambing pen, which would sound pretty feasible. Looking at it from the other side, quite interesting. It's been buttressed here by the Dunbar bars to support the east gable. And also, when you look at the stack, you can see this gaping great big hole in that, where somebody had nicked the fireplace that was in there. So people were diving in and grabbing bits as and when they could. And yes, you can just make it out just there. That is the shield of Robert Reed, and that was on an earlier photograph. So looking at that and bearing that in mind there, 1981, it all came down. Massive, great big crash. It is still quite beyond me how the stair tower survived, and certainly how that north stack survived. I mean, certainly the vibration, if nothing else, of many hundreds of tons of stone coming down should have taken it. Okay. Now, the Abbott's house at that time, for safety's sake, was then enclosed in a compound, which it still is today. And initially, Moray Council planned to repair the damage to the house, keep it open to the public. But following changes in boundaries, they pulled away from the project. And with one exception, they've unfortunately not been able to afford to have given extra money to it. In 2003, the Kinloss Trust was formed. But before that, because I forgot about this slide, the roof up here, this is the South Transit area here, and that's the sacristy here. So we're looking at that, and there was a concrete floor all the way around there. The Moray Council at the time had sent in some people to come in and start to remove the concrete because there were leaks, etc. And they came down on this. So Scotia came in and did some planning, restoration, etc. And then subsequently covered it back over with a lime scree followed by turf, etc. And that was the work previous. Again, very, very limited, some fantastic shots of it. This picture here is taken from standing right up on top of there, so you're 2-3 stories up on that one. And we've got a staircase coming up the side, which would run up into there, and another staircase that runs down that side there, which will take you down into this area here. So, quite interesting, the actual stuff that was there. 2012, now we're well into the Kinloss Abbey Trust period at this stage. Emma Malone, who's an archaeologist who was at the time on the Trust, did some field walking in this area here and around here, found a load of stuff, mainly ceramics, etc. But also, as they were doing it, looking around, following loads of stones. So those were taken into the Abbey grounds for safekeeping. Orca came down at the same time and did some geophys within the graveyard here. This is the cloistered area, the cloistered garth around here. So they did some stuff there, but nothing really leapt out. And they also went inside the Abbott's house. Now, considering a lot of that stone hadn't been moved at the time from the collapse, it's hardly surprising they didn't see a lot. And I'd like to maybe one day do that, and certainly here, to try and find any sort of connection between the Abbott's house and the monastic complex in general. Finally got some money out of Moray Council, which was very, very good of them, and it saved the stair tower. And you can see here the extent of the crack. Obviously that's on the inside, but it went right through to the outside. So that was filled and pinned. Outside of the tower, this is looking sort of north. All of this area here, the upstairs doorways are going into different floors, had to be refilled, metal work put in there just to preserve the actual building itself. And then a lot more recently, we've had, I believe this was Haas, around about 2019, doing a watching brief. You can see here the gaping hole was still in place at that time. So we employed Masonry and Lime, local specialist firm, to come in and install a brand new stone fireplace, purely to give it structure and make sure that the rest of the stack didn't fall down. 2 years ago, further work done here. The tops of the two north vaults were cleaned back, and then there's a membrane put over the top of that, followed by a little bit so it looks like this. So that's where we are at the present time with excuse me, with the north vaults and the north stack. Just as an aside, if you look at this, and it's even clearer on that one there, that wall is not central. It's right off on one side, which I find interesting because I'm not a civil engineer. Maybe David can enlighten us later, but I wouldn't have built that. I'd have built that right over the centre of that bit. But as I've said to a few people, that's been there since 1530, and I haven't been. So, you know, it's stood the test of time, whereas I've not. But it's just a very interesting little bit on that one there. Okay. Recent work, this is what I've been doing now for the last sort of 18 months or so. Firstly, the historical side, really hunting around, finding and starting to research all the primary source material I can do. I've got access to 11 archives as well as public archives, and thanks to John Barrett, I've managed to get hold of a load of the charters for when it was sold off, when the Walter Reed and his wife Margaret Collis sold off. So I'm putting together a map now of some 85, 90 few farms that Kinloss Abbey used to own and then were fewed out. So I can start producing that map of the area, which would be quite good. And then with all the information, including secondary source stuff, I'm putting a big timeline. That's just a small snapshot of it, covering about 100 years. There was probably half a dozen, maybe a dozen max, little points that I had when I started. So you can see the sort of information that's coming through. And a lot of here is now building from the Brodie archives, which is really good. Archaeological side, undertaking field walking exercises. We've done one already and we'll show you the results of that in a minute. And I'd like to do that on a sort of a repeating basis to start building up an idea of what's there. Using RES, I'd like to find out the extent of the monastic complex outside the graveyard. As I said, I can't really do much inside, but certainly on the outside, how big was this monastery? A little bit within, and HES gave me permission to go in. To be honest, not a lot was found. I'd like to locate the water source for the abbey, both drinking and running water, for reasons I'll come into in a minute. And establish the extent of the abbot's house, because of what's left. I think it was vastly bigger. And then take a full study of the standing building remains to understand their chronology and their history. So that's where we're sort of moving towards there. Michael, very good, created this little map for me, which is absolutely perfect for identifying. There's the 4 metre contour going around here, and we can see that the abbey is actually there. It's right on that peninsula with the straightens, the canalised burn going around it. The flow is from east to west on that one there. But it just shows this thing about the Cistercians always liking having water flow on preferably preferably two sides. So that highlights that, and the fact that it was on this quite prominent little promontory that sticks out there. Very quick one, I'm sure you're all well up to on the sort of general layouts of the monastic complexes. I've put the picture of Melrose in purely for the scale, just to remind ourselves that although we've only got stones that are a matter of a couple of feet tall, maybe up to 1 story, These things were huge. These things are absolutely vast, and a tremendous amount of stone there. And that's just the actual church we can see from Melrose. The rest of the complex was vast, as we can see here with Bylands, which is a bit of a blueprint for the Cistercians. That said, topography always came into it, and there were variations. Excuse me. Wrong one. So we have the church area up here with the north and south transits. We've got where the choir monks would be in the crossing area, and this is where the tower was built. We have where the lay brothers and later the general public, when they were sort of attending masses, would be. And the cloister area here. Now, we don't have the lane, and I know there wasn't a lane because you'd be able to see it. Basically, you'd certainly see the scar in the wall. It's not there. This wall would have been continuous all the way down, and that would have been cellars at the bottom, and we've still got on the west side, we've got these here represent Gothic arches as for the individual storerooms. So I've got all of that on that side. We've got on the south side, we've got the kitchens, the refectory area. With the Cistercians, they used to put their refectory area, certainly from the middle 11th century, would be in a north-south orientation. Benedictines before that, generally in an east-west. You had the warming room, which was the only place outside the kitchen which had a fire going all year round. The cloister, which is basically a seclusion area where the choir monks lived. Along here, sort of facing south with the sun and the warmth during the winter, that's where they would do a lot of their manuscripts, etc. And then toddle off into the warming room to get warm when needed. On the east side, again, a two-storey building. You'd have had on the upper floor the dormitory. Earlier it was a big open dormitory room for the choir monks. They lived there. The lay brothers would have been on the second floor here. Chapter house, that was the sort of the headquarters. And as I mentioned, when the Cromwellian forces, all the stone was sold to them, they took out this building as well, the actual chapter house, which was a bit of a shame, although they did get a new church out of it. Just to the north of this, you've got what's called the library and a vestry going down through here. That's in the same place as what we're calling the sacristy. And also on that map I showed you, the 1906 map, it's called the Skype in that particular place. So there's variations of what it could be. Outside of that, we've got loads of other things. We've got the infirmary and the infirmary cloister area down here for the choir monks. Same deal over here for the lay brothers. They'd have had their mini cloister. And they would have also had an infirmary for the lay brothers when they were there. And probably a third one for the general public. Because at this time, the monasteries were the only place you really got any sort of medical care for what it was worth. So that's the general layout. Up here, just to the sort of immediately to the east, is where the monks used to be buried in that cemetery area there, whereas the abbots would be buried inside either the church itself or the chapter house. So the upstanding remains. Here we go. All of this inside of here is protected by Historic Environment Scotland. So we're incredibly limited as to what we can do here. Abbott's House here, still inside the compound. To the west of it, this is also Moray Council area, and we've got the reduita, or latrine drain, coming down through here. You can actually see the toilet chute, for want of a better, in the tower here, when the flow of water, they needed a flow of water, would have then swept it off into the Kinloss Burn, somewhere south of that. It is the plan of the Trust to clean this area up and turn it into a sensory garden, remembering back to the herbs, etc., that the monastery had. So that's the sort of thing we're looking at doing. You can see the outline of the church here. and we've seen the South Transit with what we're calling the sacristy here. Things were starting to not line up for me. This doorway here shouldn't have been there. And if you look at it from this side, it looks one thing. If you look at it from that side, it looks totally a different sort of, doesn't make sense. So that was one sort of bit that was questioning. This wall here is the north inside wall of the chapter house. And again, things were just not going right for me. I couldn't put my finger on it. Just in the corner here, we had a tower going up, and I've had a look around. Curus has got something similar, but not the same. So anyway, come on, you can do it. Thank you. This is that wall. A couple of things stood out saying this was the tower, which just didn't look right. There's a void going up there, but no indication up here or up there that there was a tower or a flue or anything. There are various different people. Stonework here is different to the stonework here, but the real one that was getting me was these arches coming around here. That stops, as you would expect. One comes straight out at us, one at 45 degrees, and then one against the wall, up and down. Same deal, 45, up, 45, up and down. Same deal, up and down. Same deal. Hang on, that can't be right. So there was something big wrong with this. So anyway, I had a little dig around, came across this lovely picture back in 1890, the lady and child. A couple of things. The bundle column here, just remember that bit. That south stack is now gone, and we can see another bit of buttressing here. But if we look over here, look at the edge of that, and that, and that, and indeed that. So from roughly the same area, first thing you point out is the thieving buggers around about Moray have nicked most of the column here. But when you look over here, how it's been smoothed out, and there. And although we can't see behind the yew tree, take a little look there, been completely redone. And then, probably on the same day this photograph was taken, if we zoom in from the south, these look pretty much the same as they were, been improved slightly. But look at this. That is not that nice little Norman Romano arch that we've seen. That's actually a rib, or the rib vault on the inside. Big pile of rubble there. And look at the edge there. What we're looking at there is the handiwork of the Dunbars. What threw me originally was I didn't realise the extent at which these people had done this. Absolutely amazing the amount of work they'd done, for good or bad. But you sort of look at it and you think, oh, that was how it was, and maybe there was a few tweaks. No, that was done sometime around about 1900, give or take 5 years. So you can actually pin it down through the photographs and through the newspaper reports as to what was done when and where. From here, now, this George Henry Hutton's sketch of the Abbey here, 1812, yes, I know it won't go, come back. It does say 1815, I'm sure of it down there, it's a bit smudgy. This is, he sketches from roughly where the lady and child were. Here we've got going down South Transit into the Sacristy area. Well, that's the Abbot's house. That's the east gable that collapsed. Behind that would have been the stair tower. Is that there the north and south stacks? I think it is. Is that the west gable that was blown up? Again, possibly. We've got flooring indications here, a gap. Was that just robbed out, or does it indicate that the building really wasn't that big? And then this here, again, you've got the floor system that's coming here. I think he's got his perspective wrong here, and this should be back sort of several feet. behind that, because that is the cloister wall, and there is absolutely nothing of that there. So I think his perspective is wrong on that one there. But if we go across here now onto the wall itself, we can see the top frame here plus the corbels of the covered walkway for the cloister, which we're basically inside of here. Well, this chap is. Is that a cow? Can anybody look at it? I just don't know. But here we've got the lavatory. So this is where they would have their basins, so they'd wash their hands before they went into the refectory. That's the entrance to the refectory, and there's another arch there, and where does that come from? But that's the corner. Move up here, and again, another massive hole there. And if we look at this, lavatory, yeah, arch, beautiful arch going into the refectory, but here, and I know it stands out a hell of a lot now, it's just very recent that's come on with some lichen growth when this was taken. But that, there used to be a hole there, another arch, another doorway. And when you go up and have a look at it, you can see the sort of state, the design, the build of the walls here, which goes all the way down here and all the way around here, the same style. You go in here and it's actually modern stone. But until you really look at it, you don't notice. So again, that was their work. In the corner there, again, it now stands out clearly. You can see the old stonework going around here. That's probably just been pointed, but all of this has gone in to replace that hole. So when I originally thought, well, it's going to be post the Lay Brothers 1350, I was right, but I was slightly out by a couple of hundred years. That's 1900 that was done. You can applaud the Dunbars for keeping what there was and putting the work in and the effort and stopping the destruction. I just wish they'd left a plan and told somebody what they did. That's the only thing about it. Field walking, we did this about this time last year, and they're just starting to plough now. So we're hoping to do some more very shortly. Oh, there we go. Again, this was the main field that we hit. This bit here, Emma had already done a bit of this, but we started till we ran out of light, basically. But if you look in here, most of it, let's go down here to start with. This is all sort of improvement 19th century, sort of standard stuff you'll find from midden spreads. This was the sort of pottery I was looking for, the medieval type pottery. But this, I'm going to have to send this away for analysis, I think, because this was found in an ark there. Now with the Lay Brothers, their dormitories here, so this area around here would likely have been where they would have had their foundries, their blacksmith shops, the storerooms, and all the other bits and bobs would have been down this area. I would have expected this lot to have probably been down here. That would have been a good indication. But it's not, it's up there. So it's interesting to see what there's going to be this time around when we do some more field walking. Could be glass, I'm not sure. I'm quite open to suggestions on that. So that was that bit. Okay, I'll look at the non-invasive surveys that I was completing. This was done late 2024 into 25 as the first campaign, and then subsequently October 25 was the second campaign for resistivity studies. What was actually the background to this, though, and what was I looking for? I came across this map during previous studies, and it is actually a copy of the William Anderson map that I mentioned from 1746. And this is part of his survey of the Leathern Estates, and this particular map covers the Kinloss Abbey area. And straight away we can see, when we look down here, this curve. And if you remember back right at the start of the presentation, when we had the Google Earth oval-shaped area going around it, here we've got where the 9001, the B9001 is, swings that down and then off towards Birkhead. From here over the bridge up towards Findorm, past the church and the glebe that was built by Alexander Brodie the First after the chapter house was taken away. And this is now the road that goes down and all the way up the hill far side to the A96. Now, before we go into the actual abbey itself, there's some interesting features just here. We've got Lethens Dam Wood over here. They've straightened out the Kinloss Burn at this point going through here. And then this little building here is a mill, which is very interesting. Below the mill, as it runs off towards the Findorm Bay, we can see it's non-straightened. It's very wiggly, this particular part of the stream, and it goes. It follows very much into that LiDAR picture we saw earlier that Michael Sharp produced. But above it, it's been straightened. Here we've got the mill dam. So this is our backup of our water supply here. As far as this mill is concerned, this area here, just running down here, there's quite a big cut. Now, whether this is a relatively recent quarry, it may have been stone taken for building of roads, that I don't know. But there's certainly a big dip here. So if where the mill is, there was a secondary lade coming down to feed running water down towards the abbey itself, it would have had to have gone around this before crossing what is now the road, and then swinging down to the abbey. But we'll see a little bit more of that later. If we then zoom in on this area here, on this map up here on the top, or this part of the map up on the top right, a couple of things that stand out to start with. We've got a plantation of trees down here and another plantation of trees here, which is surrounded by a wall. Now, the question that comes from this is this part of, or the residual parts of the orchards that were planted during Abbot Robert Reid's period by his gardener who came across from Dieppe? If you recall, he planted some 123 pear trees and 146 apple trees. Are these two the remains of those orchards? Question, what is this building here? No idea. We have the road that comes around, swings around, and then we've got the gentle arcing road that comes down to the abbey itself. I'll look into that a little bit closer later. Now, where the actual abbey ruins are, remember this is 1746, this was taken. This area here would have been the West Cloister Wall with the Lay Brothers area. Here would have been the church, not showing the transits north and south. And this area here would undoubtedly been where the chapter house was and the dormitories for the choir monks. But this south facing building here, is this the abbot's house? I think there's a very, very strong suggestion that this is the abbot's house, with this part here representing the stair tower that we've already seen before. Is this gable here the west gable, or is this gable here part of the north and south stacks that I pointed out earlier with the wall in between? And we can see that the building goes a lot further, potentially another stair tower off to the west hand side. This is quite likely a big building. Remember, we had high grade people coming into this. We had excuse me, Mary Queen of Scots, for example, stayed there with her people, so it would have needed to have been quite a large building. But at the present time, all we've got is a little bit of this that's left. So just how big is the abbot's house, or how big was the abbot's house, should I say? And finally, if we just look up in this corner down here, we see this little area here, which is marked as Alex Gordon's property. Now, the big feature in this, to me, is when you look into it, we have an arch a gateway. This is almost certainly, I believe, the gatehouse to the entire monastic complex. And basically, post 1560, it would have been utilised, I suspect, by local farmers or businessmen or whoever to move in there. And in this particular time, 1746, Alex Gordon. But this, I believe, is the site of the monastic gatehouse. Now, with all that information, that gives us something to go for and have a look and see if we can find these some information outside the current graveyard. So if we move on, just have a very quick look. Now we're looking from north at the bottom to south here. We can see again the arching road, this almost causeway that takes us down to the monastery complex down here. So Alex Gordon's property would have been straddling this road here. This Dean Archibald's yard would have been around here somewhere, and probably stretching right up on top of the slope. So first thing we did, apart from the field walking that was in this area here, was to have a look and put two 40 by 20s grids in here, either side the lane, to try and pick up any sign of Alex Gordon's and the potential gatehouse. On top of the rise here, we put in a very small 20 by 20 grid just to see if there was anything in that area. And then following on from the work of advice from the farmer, who told us that he'd been finding work stone in this area when he was ploughing, we put in a 40 by 20 grid here. Again, thinking back to the Leathern map, when there's that small building off to the side of what looks like the abbot's house, to find out what it is. And if I just go back one, that's the building I'm now talking about here, just attached to it. So that was the plan of action. The first time we went there, which was late 24, we did what I've just suggested there, or described there. These two areas here, target area 1, target area 2, were absolutely sodden, far too wet, and really we shouldn't have even attempted it, but we did. Results were absolutely rubbish. We did have a few little sniffs in this small area here that we did, and again that was quite interesting. Really, we should have gone for a bigger area on this one. And then down here again, we started finding some interesting little results. So the result of that was we decided to go back and just expand again once the ground had dried in very early 25. Increase this area here, make this a 40 by 40 grid here, and expand here to again make it a 40-40 grid. So in early 24, some mighty Nossassians went down and we gridded the area out, aided by Nicola, who has done a lot of work with Nossas and is also an archaeological student. So we went down and had a look, gridded the place out, and these were the first results we had. In here, by extending this up to, with better ground, to a 40 by 40, we can see possibly some information here. Worthwhile coming back to this. I'm not sure, to be honest, I got the processing right on this one. This was a small tentative one we put at the bottom of the slope. And again, a couple of little minor features of interest. On the top of the rise, this 40-40 that we put in here certainly was coming up for some very interesting information and certainly warranted going back. Below, there's the abbot's house there. In this area here, we put in a second 20 by 40 grid here. Unfortunately, I think I got the processing the wrong way around. You live and learn on this. But there was certainly enough there to say we need to go back and have another look. So with that in mind, and going back to the original aims of the archaeology, which just to say, is there anything of the monastic complex which is physically outside of the graveyard? Because remember, this area here is all under protection, and we can't excavate or do anything in there. So the plan was to put in a 40-meter band all the way around the graveyard there on the south, the east, and the north side of it to see if there was any indications at all that the monastic complex had actually been outside of the current graveyard. We also asked the owner of this property here if we could do a little bit of geophys on their lawn, and they were, yes, no problems at all, so that was good. The grass car park outside of it, again, we put a little mini geophys grid there, and after sought permission from HES, we put in a 5-meter strip down here. So we're sort of rather hoping that all three of these together might build us a little picture and give away something. And we also put in another little area here, again, after HES was asked and gave us the permission. Very much the same area that Orca had looked at in 2020. So that was the plan for that one there. So we came back in after harvest, October 25, and this was the result of that. So just quickly looking here, these three grids or grid areas here haven't really shown us anything, which is unfortunate, but that was a finger in the wind, if you like, on that one. Likewise, the other area that Orca had done back in 2012, we didn't gain anything here. I was really looking to see if we could find any evidence of cloister walls around here, and there wasn't at that stage, so that was one of those. But the rest of these, suddenly, we were getting some very interesting returns on this one. The one that immediately leaps out is this very rectilinear, very regular return all the way around the eastern end. Could this be the precinct wall? I think there's a very, very good chance it could be. It would appear to be the right size. It will need to be followed up, obviously, on that. But that is a definite indication in my mind we may have just located the precinct wall. What are these? Are these just paths coming in and out? I don't know. But there's also large areas of returns, again, inside the wall. Are these extra buildings which were, part of the monastic complex? Remembering this side, we'd have had the infirmary cloister, various different novice schoolrooms, etc. So there's a lot of buildings that need to be there, even down to things like the redoiters, the toilets, etc. So there's a lot of exciting things there that have come up. Outside of that, one of the ones I'm quite interested in is this little line that comes in, splits there, and splits there again. Now, if we follow that line, we're actually going across the hill, but slightly uphill all the way. And that takes us roughly to that area that I was describing for the potential lade coming off of the mill. So that's of interest, because that would be their source of running water coming in, not for drinking, but certainly for clearing their drains through the kitchens, their toilet areas, and all the rest of it, would then have this natural flush coming through. As I've mentioned earlier, coming through the abbot's house, there is a drain system which runs straight down there, coming off of the latrine from the abbot's house. So that would have needed constant flowing water. So is that an indication of that that water supply coming in there? That's all very interesting. We've also got potential buildings down here, potential bits of wall. So the October and this took about 4 or 5 days to actually complete in total. I've come up with some really very, very interesting points. I'd like to go back. That is the intention after harvest this year. Firstly, although that's the slope, it may well be worth putting in a 40/40 there. I'd like to revisit weather conditions okay. This area here to see if Alex Gordon's property is there. Down here, possibly a band going across, as that could well be part of the complex the Lay brothers had for storerooms, for blacksmith shops, and various other sort of light engineering, light industry type stuff down there. And the other big area to do then would be to expand out here by probably another 40 meters off of this line here, really trying to find out exactly what that's doing. And that could be very exciting. Potential echoes up here. Again, it depends how time goes. We could put an area in up here, a couple of 40/40s would fill out that. So there is a lot to continue with in the forthcoming sort of post-harvest period this year to really start to pin down what there is subsurface at Kinloss Abbey. I think I'm very excited on what we can find here. And as I said right at the very start, there isn't a monastic plan. There is no ideas of what the size, shape of the complex was. All we have is a few extending walls around here, bits and bobs, and that cloister wall. This was a very important abbey, and there was an awful lot of stuff there. So have we sort of taken a massive step to find the precinct area? And just before I say thank you very much and any questions, this is a photograph taken inside the sacristy, where the work of the Dunbars, in fact, Mrs. Dunbar, after the Reverend John died, when she completed this, including concrete in floor, turning it into a little chapel, and using the sort of discarded stone that she found, or they found around there, and possibly that could be part of the tomb of John Gordon, the 1515 robber. Okay, so thank you very much, and hopefully I can come back sometime in the future and give you an update. That's brilliant. Cheers.